I'm about to drop a line for you and your audience. You ready?
Always.
Fired up.
Check your ego.
Okay.
Oh,
Check your ego as a coach.
welcome back, Pushin P family. Hope y'all are doing well. We got a banger today. We have on our new friend, Daniela Spear, Coach Danny from Remade Wellness. Had an awesome conversation with her. Daniela is a strength coach, a restorative movement coach, primarily working with clients who are experiencing autoimmune disease, and herself has healed herself from 15 years of her own autoimmune journey, which we get into on the show. But JT, what do we talk about today?
Man, I'm stoked for everybody to get into it. So I'm going to keep it tight. We get into her autoimmune journey and her decision to become an restorative movement coach. So we're going to get into that. How coaches can best serve their clients with autoimmune diseases, and the lessons that she's learned that helped her work with her clients, and also applies to clients that are not suffering from autoimmune diseases. So a lot of good stuff. Get your coffee, get whatever you need, because you're gonna have to lock it on this.
Yeah, lock it in. Let's lock it in.
Let's lock it in.
All right, let's get it.
Let's go.
So the website bio is more centered around my diagnosis. But what I would change now is a lot more focused on what I think is the more important part of the story is the healing process of healing autoimmunity. I think that that's the story that doesn't get shared very often, because I think rightfully so, people in the autoimmune community have to speak up about what they experience, rightfully so. But I think when people start talking about feeling better, healing, no longer having chronic illness, it is the same autoimmune community that shuts them out. So I think it's the healing story gets silenced or just not told very often.
Interesting. So are you saying it? So it's saying like when someone is first going through like initial diagnosis, the community is super supportive?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's like, what's that saying? Misery loves company. I hate to use that, but like if you, are ever in any kind of like autoimmune Facebook groups, any autoimmune support groups, it can sometimes turn into a bit of a like, oh, well, I have 7 autoimmune diseases. Oh, well, I have this plus that. It's almost like a competition of like who's the most ill. And it can be very like crab bucket mentality where you're just like pulling each other down. So it's
crabs.
Yeah.
I've never heard that analogy before. I'm sorry. I did not mean to laugh at that.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny because my husband tells me every time, but I'm like, I didn't make this analogy up. Like it's the crab bucket. Like when
It's
crabs
good.
are trying to crawl out of the bucket, the other crabs pull them down.
Yeah.
And that can, at least, for me, that was certainly my experience within one, being a participant of the autoimmune space, and then 2, being a coach, trying to provide a solution in the autoimmune space. So it can be pretty interesting to navigate, which is why I think like the healing stories need to be told more often.
Is that what you meant when you said the ones who bring you down are actually in the same community?
What was that? Sorry.
When you said that earlier, you mentioned like the story does get talked about, but then at some point something gets shut out, which is from the
so
community.
When I started sharing about like, hey, exercise can really help you, right? Like that was just kind of like the first, like dipping my toes into like, actually, I think we can do something about this. there's just immediate backlash. Like, absolutely not. Autoimmune disease is chronic. Like, your body attacks itself. There's nothing you can do about it. And
Mhm.
I got kicked out of Facebook groups. It's just
Wow.
like lost like followers on social media. I would get comments about how my content was harmful, was offensive, and yeah. So it's just like I've dealt with the trolls
Damn.
of the very same people that will praise you for talking about your symptoms and being sick, right? And
Hmm.
it's just like when you share that story of being sick, and nothing against people who are in that place and are sharing their chronic illness journey. That's important to share too. But you get a lot more praise for sharing about being sick than you get for healing, for sharing about being able to heal, reverse autoimmunity, start living your life outside of a diagnosis. Like,
Yeah.
it's lonely on that side of the fence.
Interesting. And I like it's I'm speaking for myself and JT here, like, not knowing a ton about the autoimmune community and people who are, dealing with a ton of autoimmune symptoms. And it's like probably safe to assume that people on the internet on all quarters are really mean to each other and just like not
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It
not
is the
nice.
internet.
It's the
Uh,
internet. But so like in that moment,
mm,
was it just the fact that you were a coach? Was it you were seeing the value in the things that you
yeah.
were doing? But what made you say, you know what, I'm gonna tune all that stuff out. I don't care that I'm getting, granted, I'm sure it was, shitty in the moment, but like I'm gonna keep going. I'm gonna keep spreading this message. I'm gonna build this up and share this with more people.
Yeah, that's a great question because in the beginning, when I would get backlash for even like suggesting that you can heal and be better, I would get a lot of comments about like, "Well, you're not really relatable," or like, "That's not my experience," or like, "Oh,
Mm,
well, lucky you, right? Like, you must be special." And so it would make me want to quiet myself, right? I would kind of like stop sharing. I would like kind of go periods of like where I'm going to share and then, not share because I wasn't very confident. I wasn't
Mm,
very confident. And I think too, because no one else was talking about strength training or exercise in general for autoimmune disease,
yeah.
there was like a point in like my career where I was like, am I making this up? Like, there's no way, right? And so you kind of like, you don't have like that support
mm,
of
Hmm.
other people. You can't point to like, well, so and so, somebody else is talking about this, so like I can't be wrong. Like, no one else was talking about it. And so it did feel scary to kind of like tread new waters
Mm,
alone. And
yeah.
I think part of my own healing journey is learning to use my voice, learning to speak up, and more importantly, validating myself. Because I think a part that is very, unfortunately, very common in anyone's autoimmune story. So, for those maybe that aren't familiar with autoimmune disease is kind of this category of diseases where the immune system becomes hyperactive and begins to mistakenly attack the body's healthy tissues.
Hmm.
And that can impact any organ. That can, even people diagnosed with lupus, like I was when I was younger, everyone's lupus diagnosis can look completely different because it's everyone's own immune system, right?
Mm.
And, oh, I just lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that?
So just real quick, and on that note,
Yeah.
it seems like the autoimmune would be like the umbrella term of other more commonly known
Mm.
diseases, if you will. What
Yeah.
other ones would you say would fall into that bucket?
Yeah, so I think some of the other commons or ones are like hypothyroidism, celiac disease, IBS,
Got it.
um, I mean, type 1 diabetes also is autoimmune disease.
Mm.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think
Interesting.
probably those are one rheumatoid arthritis, probably ones that most people would know of,
Okay.
right? Oh, that's what I was talking about. A part of everyone's autoimmune journey is seeking validation for the things that they experience, because a lot of people get dismissed, and it can take up to 3 to 4 years to get an accurate diagnosis.
Mm.
So for me, learning to self validate has been medicine in itself, if that
Mm.
makes sense. Like learning to validate myself, my experience, my autoimmune experience, and also the experience of exercising has actually helped me decrease both the frequency and the intensity of autoimmune flare-ups. And that
Mm.
was kind of where it started for me. Is I was feeling better while I was implementing exercise, right?
Mm.
And I think for me, along the way, it has been a challenge to validate myself and say, this is what I'm experiencing. I'm experiencing healing in my body, and no one can take that from me, right?
Yeah.
Like, no one can take that experience from me. But being able to say that, being able to speak on that and share about that was part of the healing journey in itself.
Mm.
Interesting. So you kind of answered a question that I had in my head when you said that. Just curious when you say, you know, allowing yourself to self-validate to as part of the healing process. Going back to what you said with the community kind of kicking you out, what else do you think would be the reason for them to do that? Is there something that was specifically in their mind of like, I don't like this message, you're out of here.
Yeah. Well, I do want to just clarify that I don't think the like entire autoimmune community like kicked me out. There was a point in my own life where I also chose to step away
Mm.
because of what I was experiencing, right? Like no one said like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
out of here. I mean, aside from being like blocked from some Facebook groups, but
But
I think
you got pushed back, so I think like
yeah, I
that's
got
the main
pushed
thing,
back.
right?
But I think because like I said before, getting an accurate diagnosis or having a medical professional believe what you're experiencing is such a difficult process in the beginning that anytime you encounter someone, in a sense, invalidating what you experience or someone having a different experience, it can almost feel
Mm.
threatening because it can feel like, well, how can, she's getting better, but I'm not. Is
Mm,
there something wrong with me? Right?
Yeah.
Like, and that can be, in a sense, very invasive if you
sure.
aren't, if you're not prepared to confront that, if you're
Yeah.
not prepared to confront the realities of autoimmune disease that don't get talked about, right?
Yeah.
Because at the doctors,
Mm.
you get your lab work done. Your The narrative that you're told is like your immune system's attacking you. There's nothing you can do about it. You have to take this medicine for the rest of your life.
Mm.
The other side of that is that there is very much a lifestyle component, and there's very much an mental and emotional component to autoimmune
Mm.
disease, right?
Mm.
And those two are very difficult to confront because it almost feels like, well, if this is lifestyle related, if this is emotional related, then does that mean autoimmune disease is my fault?
Mm.
Right? And that, right, when you start like
Yeah.
putting the responsibility onto people, that's
Sure.
difficult. And you know that as coaches, when you're working with your clients, autoimmune disease or not, like when you confront your clients about their lifestyle outside of their workout, the conversation changes, like the energy shifts in that conversation.
Yeah. It's a hard conversation, right? Like, you gotta have someone own up to what they're doing and
Hmm.
take responsibility, hold themselves accountable. It's yeah. It's far from easy. But you mentioned how difficult diagnosis can be, right? And I can only imagine what it would be like, 3 to 4 years to get, accurately diagnosed and actually understand what's going on internally. But can you speak a little bit about yourself, right? So you mentioned, being diagnosed with lupus. What was that initial process like for you? And then how did you, break out of it and actually get to, the healing point that you're at now?
Yeah, so my process started when I was like 15, 16. I was in high school and I was just started experiencing these very mysterious symptoms. My hair was falling out, I was just having digestive issues, joint pain, and I was just going to see a lot of different doctors. So from the point when my symptoms started, um, to when I got diagnosed was about an 18-month process. So, relatively speaking, my process to receiving a diagnosis was relatively quickly.
Mm,
It was relatively fast. And um, they said, you'll have a normal life. You'll just take this medication for the rest of your life. And that was kind of that. We
Mm.
didn't really ask a lot of questions, because we also didn't know what to ask at the time.
yeah.
We didn't really seek alternative options because we didn't know that there were alternative options. And so that was kind of my journey through the remainder of high school, through college, into my early adulthood was just, you know, I have a diagnosis, I take this medication, and this is my life.
Hmm.
The process of integrating exercise into my lifestyle started in college. I was an athlete in high school, did gymnastics growing up, I played soccer. But when I got to college, I was no longer playing sports. So I kind of just started working out.
Yeah.
And I think, like any young adult that is passionate about exercise, you kind of like go too hard too fast. And right, I kind of took on this mentality that, you know what, exercise like makes me feel good. I'm going to use it as a way to prove that lupus doesn't own my life, right? And
Mm,
while at the time that can seem like really inspiring, like that was actually very damaging to my mental health, because in a sense I was saying, I was like dissociating from the fact that my body needed support in a way that I
mm.
didn't know how, but I was just, I'm going to exercise this thing away. And we know that doesn't work for like
Yeah.
anything, any goal, right? We can't just like exercise things out of your life. And so I was, at the time, I became a bit of an over exerciser. I didn't really like realize it until you kind of look back and you're like, I probably
Yeah.
didn't need to push my body that hard. But when I started working for Exos and I started learning more about the performance strategies used for athletes, and I
Mm,
started kind of implementing that at work, and then I started implementing that in my own workouts and my own practice, my own movement practice. I started feeling such a huge shift in my
mm,
experience with lupus, my experience with autoimmune symptoms.
hmm.
And I was learning a lot more about rest and recovery and like better nutrition practices. And imagine that I started having less severe and frequent autoimmune flare ups. Like, right? I was like,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
I remember I would start measuring, like, oh, like I went an entire 6 months without missing work due to an autoimmune flare up, right?
Yeah.
And like for
Yeah.
anyone with an autoimmune disease, like that's a huge milestone, right? 3 to
Yeah.
6 months without missing like work or school, like that's huge. And I started like kind of diving into like, I think something here is working. And I started saying, what if the principles applied to athletes to improve human performance could
Mhm.
be applied to patients with autoimmune disease, right?
Mm.
Crazy idea at the time. And like I said, I would just be like, did I make this up? Like, am I the first one to have this thought? Like, probably not, but no one else was talking about it. And I had this idea that if these practices can make athletes like more human, can we implement that for people that experience a disease that makes them less human, right? Because autoimmune disease begins to take away your daily function, right? Especially autoimmune disease that attacks your connective tissue. You
Yeah.
begin to lose function, you begin to have trouble in your activities of daily living. So, can we implement these practices to help autoimmune patients be more human, just like we do with athletes? And I started implementing it into my routine. I started kind of like suggesting these ideas to some clients I was working with at the time, and clients were getting better. Hey, my labs look better. I'm feeling way better. I haven't had a flare up in a month. And I was like, oh my gosh, this stuff works. And I think that is when like I started building confidence, and I started realizing like, you know what, I think I can actually do something about this. And just like quick side story, around that same time I was also experimenting with like nutritional changes, and I also like was taking a finance class, and I was like, oh, you know what, like it's me. I'm the problem of why I overspend. Like my finances look like trash right now. Like, and it was just kind of that moment of like taking responsibility. And I was like, I can take responsibility over my finances. What else can I take responsibility for? And like that just kind of started this like snowball effect of me like leaning into meditation, leaning into breath work, and leaning into how these practices change our physiology, which has eventually led me to like where I am now, just like exploring the like psychosomatic connection, the way that the mind body works together, and the emotional root causes of autoimmune disease, how our emotions play into the behaviors of our lifestyle and
Yeah.
create autoimmune disease. So that is kind of quick version of my journey from being diagnosed to where I am now. Which actually just this week I hit a big milestone of being 9 months medication free after being on medication for 15 years. So,
Wow.
Hell yeah.
like I
Hell,
said before, the
how
stuff
does that
works.
feel to say?
No, it feels really cool. I mean, it's when I initially got off of medication, it was like getting to know my body all over again. Because like all of a sudden my like stress tolerance was like way back to zero, right? As it's like
Yeah.
you learn to live and you adapt and you adjust like while on medication, but once you take away that safety net, your stress threshold is very very low. And so I had to like really begin to explore like, one, what can I handle with exercise. I scaled back a lot because I was just kind of in this trial and error phase. And
Yeah.
9 months later, I feel like my medication free body is still somewhat of an infant, and I'm still like learning a lot about myself and still exploring a lot about my stress threshold. What can I handle? What is okay? And kind of just experimenting with a lot of different approaches
Yeah.
to what makes me feel good.
Wow. Congratulations. That's like a
Yes,
big
seriously.
milestone. Like
Yeah.
when I hear 15 years, like it's almost like the story that you just said. You were just continually reframing your identity, right? Step by step. And 15 years of doing anything for that's your identity, right? And like there's a lot of steps to revert back to kind of get out of that mindset from what you said. And to kind of go back to what you mentioned, you were losing your connective tissue, right? Technically speaking, and then you started
Yes.
to use other methods to create the connective tissue to kind of get out of certain pains, right? You mentioned rest,
Yeah.
which you weren't before. It seemed like just kind of over. What did you say? Over
Over
athleting or over
exerciser. Yeah.
exercising. Um,
Over athleting.
what other
Totally.
things were like the connective tissue for you to that you started to implement with your yourself and clients?
I think the biggest thing has been a progressive rather than an all in approach to strength training, and being incredibly mindful of your progressive overload of, you know, when is it appropriate to increase strength, right? But for me, strength training has been a way to not only build connective tissue, strengthen connective tissue, and kind of counter the inflammatory damage of autoimmune disease. But also, it's been a way to train my nervous system to handle stress. Because the number one thing that triggers autoimmune flare ups is stress related. And
Hmm.
so strength training for me became kind of this very controlled way, like in a very controlled container, to allow my body to experience stress, but then also implement recovery as a way to
Hmm.
tell my nervous system, like, hey, like, this is, you are safe, this is okay. And over time, my threshold for stress began to increase, and
Sure.
I started experiencing less autoimmune flare-ups because I had not only strengthened my body, but I had strengthened my resilience to
Yeah.
stress, right?
Hmm.
And when
And
you,
so you know, with strength training, like, we always talk about, like, strengthen muscles, strengthen joints, and strengthen your immune system, but also
Mhm.
the nervous system. And the nervous
Yeah.
system is actually a huge player in autoimmune disease that also doesn't get talked about very often because we just focus on the immune system as like a single
Hmm.
entity. But actually, the immune system is kind of like the last line of defense. There's so many other systems in the body, like the nervous system, your breath, your gut health, that influence your immune system. So by the time that your immune
Yeah.
system is like gone crazy, has gone hyperactive, it's not because it's just your immune system, it's because those other systems higher up the chain are already dysregulated. So
Right.
strength training is actually a tool that I use for myself and I use with my clients to help regulate the nervous system, regulate the breath. And you know, when people start like working out, they start paying attention to their nutrition and hydration and gut health. So then it's just
Yeah.
like the immune system begins to regulate on its own when you
Mm.
start strength training.
Hmm.
Got it. Got it. See, what you're saying, I love because it sounds so simple, right?
Right.
And
It
technically it is,
is.
but also
It is simple.
it almost it almost cannot be simple. And why I
Yeah.
say that, you know, with what we try to do here, we try to simplify complex things that like seem complex, but and are. And how do we like actually make it simple? And why I say that, we were digging into your one of your episodes. You know, me and Phil were
Digging.
doing
Let's go.
some big studying. Complicated solutions are keeping you sick. That was like one episode that stood out to
Oh
me
yeah.
that you
It's a
had.
bar. A bar.
It was a
Very.
bar,
I
but
mean,
I did
wrote that
want
down so
to
fast.
I did want to highlight that and dig a little bit deeper, just because it's an interesting thought, and a few points that you mentioned in there were like we like to complicate things for
Hmm.
whatever reason,
Hmm.
when things shouldn't be complicated, and things should be simplified because that's what works. With your experience in that journey, what was complicated and how did you simplify it to make it make sense to what you just said just now?
Hmm. Yeah. I am very much a high performance individual, right? I am competitive by nature growing up. You know, I played sports, and I think many of your listeners are also high achievers, highly competitive,
Hmm.
right? As most athletes are, right? That I
Yeah.
think that's just the nature of athletes. And so for me, I have a tendency to want to do a lot at one time. And, you know, like I said, emotions play a role in autoimmune disease, and they play a role in our behaviors.
Hmm.
And if we think back to the compliments that we hear growing up as like, oh, you're so strong, like, oh, you're an overcomer, right? Like, oh, like, I'm a fighter. So we even talk about like the words like used in the autoimmune space of being a warrior. Like, what if you identify as a warrior? What does a warrior do? Someone that's always fighting,
Yeah.
Mm.
right? And so I think that kind of creates this need to make things complicated, to make things difficult, because
Mm.
we want to have that satisfaction of like, I climbed that mountain and I did that trek and took that journey and I finished it, right? Like, you want to have this sense of accomplishment, whereas, like, for example, someone who is experiencing an autoimmune flare up, you tie your shoes and no one's praising you for that, right? But like, when you're in the middle of a super intense flare up, like a pain flare up, connective tissue flare up, like, that's hard. It is hard to just get dressed, right?
Yeah.
But no one's
Hmm.
praising you for putting on your underwear and tying your shoes, right? People get praise for overcoming the really long and hard journeys. So I think that just human nature, we want to make our healing solutions, our like our progress a long journey and a complicated journey. And outside of autoimmunity, we see that with just the general population. They're like, I need to lose weight. I'm going to start this 5-day program and it's 2 hours in the gym every single day, right? And what happens?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't stick to that because it's so much that your brain has already quit before you've even started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But like, we want to think so far ahead to the finish line, and we want to think, yeah, I did this 90-day program. I did 75 hard twice,
I was
right?
just thinking that right now in my
Like,
head.
and it's a great program, right? But not for me. But we want to complicate and make
Yeah.
things as hard as possible because we think that the reward will be even sweeter at the end, totally negating the fact that you don't even have the behavior practice of walking 30 minutes a day, of just making
Literally.
time to exercise, of making time to go outside, or even just staying hydrated. Like, we think the simple basics are too simple, and there's no way it could be that easy.
Mm. I see.
But it is.
Dude, that makes me think about just our space in general and how insane it is. Like how complicated every supplement and protocol for something has gotten and how it continues to grow. And just mentioning the fact that like a lot of us are high achievers, ex-athletes. I was a pretty terrible athlete, but think of myself still that way and like to do athletic things. And it's I never connected the dots between the two,
Mhm.
right? Of like, hey, my identity is being different and doing the hard thing. So I'm going to now do this crazy ass supplement regime and do cold plunge because that's hard, right? Like, I'm just going to do hard stuff when in reality, yeah, I probably should just like carry a water bottle around, or I should like learn to cook so I could like make vegetables and eat more varied vegetables and fruits. Like, it's super simple stuff, very, very impactful, like unbelievably powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, the identity, or not the identity, but like the thought of immediate gratification, right? Like
Yeah.
the hard stuff, like doing something hard gives us that like immediate sense of success.
Yeah.
Whereas you think of like making nutritional changes, like, I always tell clients, like, hey, if you think you can eat this way for the rest of your life, you're doing it right. That's
Yeah.
like, people don't want to think about the rest of their life. Like, that's a
Nah.
long time from now, right? And whereas, like, if I do 75 hard, like, that's a lot faster. But what
Yeah.
happens in the
Yeah.
process? You burn out, you are miserable.
You're waiting
Yeah.
for the end. So
Yeah,
you're
you're
not
just
even
waiting for
thinking
the
about the sustainability, right? Like you're just like,
Mhm.
this will be done in 75 days. So I'll never have
Let
to
me
do this
just get
again.
through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a
And
sense,
it's
you
the
like
opposite.
disconnect from yourself just to get
Yeah.
things done.
Well, that is interesting way to look at it, because when you say that, it makes sense from our client's perspective. Like, I don't even like the term small wins anymore. Like, it's just the direction where you should be going. Like, if you're
Yeah.
walking, it's part of it. If your strength training is part of it, it's a win, right?
Yeah.
But with our kind of main audience of coaches, when I think of complications, it's like, I think there's a certain balance of understanding what complications should be in order to simplify it,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think that's necessarily true for the client space. Now that you're talking through it, like, I think if you just know that walking is good for you, that's fine. But then
Hmm.
as a coach, prescribing that to a client, I think we have to understand the value of running super hard 75, to now prescribe the walking 10 minutes, right? So I think
Yeah.
there's like something there where it's interesting to think about how we can simplify things to the best of either ourselves or our clients, or as a coach to a client. But just kind of going off of that, I'm very unfamiliar with this topic, as you can tell, as well as kind of Phil. But with us working with clients as well as coaches on this call, like you said, like it's you can't even get a full diagnosis from what, 18 months, you said?
Yeah.
Like,
18 months,
if
sometimes years.
if our
Mm.
clients don't even know that they're diagnosed with it, and if they are, just curious on from your lens of like how we can start to approach that as a coach. For one, if they do know that they're diagnosed with it, or two, they're not sure they have, or they might have an idea. Like, how should we approach that?
Yeah. I'm about to drop a line for you and your audience. You ready?
Always.
Fired up.
Check your ego.
Okay.
Oh.
Check your ego as a coach. Okay. Um, I think like going back to that conversation around like we know the simple things work, but we oftentimes really, at least like this was my experience as a young coach, and I mean I'm still young, but just like I'm not new to the industry anymore,
Yeah.
but I think we all still struggle with this of like if I program this really simple routine, like they're gonna think that like I don't know a lot, right? And we are
Mm.
often making our clients' programming about us and what it says about us and how it reflects on our career, our knowledge, our experience. So we have to daily check in with our ego about who is this about? Is it about me or is it about my client's
Sure.
movement experience, right?
Mm.
I think for coaches that have a client that comes to them and says, "Hey, I have this diagnosis. Can you help me? Right? I have this autoimmune disease. Can you work with me?" I think one, like I said, check your ego and don't be so quick to say, "Oh yeah, thanks for letting me know," and just dismiss it, right? Like, because sometimes, like, as coaches, we want to like seem like we know what we're talking about, right? And so we're just like, "Oh yeah, totally I got you," right? And
Yeah.
because in that moment, you don't want to be like, "I don't know what that is," right? And
You must have
Yeah.
heard my
but
coach before, huh?
yes,
Yeah.
right? Like yeah.
You've seen us. You've seen our work before. You're
No,
familiar
no,
with our
not
game.
you. But this is, also my experience as a coach.
Yeah.
I talk about autoimmune disease a lot, but I don't know about every single autoimmune disease.
Sure.
So I have to be willing in that moment to say, first of all, thank you for sharing that with me because
Hmm.
it can be a lot
Mm.
for someone
Yeah.
to just open up about that.
Right.
And then two, ask, how does this impact you on a daily basis? How does this
Mm.
impact your life? And three, how can I support you on days
Sure.
that you're not feeling well? Because the number one complaint that I have gotten from clients who have worked with a previous trainer is my trainer didn't listen to me when I was having a flare up and they just pushed me harder.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so check your ego, and then two, like, be willing to um variate from your scheduled programming, right? Whatever program you wrote, know that oftentimes it's going to be changed because your client is going to come in and say, hey, I'm experiencing this, or my energy level is just low today, like plyometrics are not in the books today. And so you have to
Yeah.
be willing to change and be flexible with your programming, and know that on days when your client with autoimmune disease is experiencing a flare up, can you scale the workout in a way, like, can you modify the workout in a way of just like decreasing weights, decreasing reps, decreasing the workout time,
Mm.
implementing more mobility, implementing breath work, things that are still going to support them and support their movement, but it's not going to push them to the extreme. It's not going to push them further into a flare up
Sure.
or a like a phase of exercise intolerance where their bodies just cannot handle
Yeah.
exercise anymore, right? Um,
Mm.
that's also something that autoimmune patients experience is exercise intolerance. Sometimes their
Right.
bodies just can literally not tolerate exercise. So can you as a coach change your programming? Are you capable of deviating from what you've written and implementing like a deload week, right?
Mm.
For that client. And maybe that deload is like every 3 weeks, right? We think
Yeah.
maybe our normal programming cycles are 6 to 12 weeks and then a deload week, or but with someone with autoimmune disease who has current disease activity, that deload
Mm.
week might need to be more often. And then also just be willing to be a student and learn along the way, because the experience is new for your client and it's new for you. And so if you can and are willing to just learn along the way, ask questions, be engaged in conversations with your client, they're going to know that you actually care because you're
Yeah.
asking
Mm.
questions, and they're
Yeah.
going to trust you for the long term.
On the other side of that coin, if there's no awareness of a diagnosed autoimmune disease, are there like questions or signs we should start to kind of at least list out or keep note of as a coach of like, oh, this person might have something
Yeah.
like an autoimmune
Yeah.
disease, you
And
know?
I think that does go back to checking our ego, because I think oftentimes it's really easy to get into that mentality of like, that person's just being lazy, or
Right.
like they're not
Yeah.
trying hard enough, or like, hey, you could squat this 35-pound kettlebell last week, why can't you do it this week?
Yeah.
Like, why aren't you trying hard enough? Like, it's easy
Yeah.
Mm.
to get into that mentality. But like I said, being willing to be a student, like as a student, you study, you collect data, you observe, and you
Yeah.
start like tracking those trends of saying like, okay, this client is experiencing a lot of inflammation, like I'm seeing it in their joints, like they're moving
Mm.
slower, their progress is declining. Maybe I should have a conversation, like, and don't be afraid to have that conversation. And you don't have to approach it with like, hey, I think you've got some disease, like you should get that
Yeah.
checked out. But like, hey, I've noticed this. I've
Yeah.
noticed your performance has declined. Is something going on? Is there something
Sure.
that I
Mm.
can support you with? And when you kind of approach it from, hey, I've noticed, I'm here to listen, you've opened up that door for people to say, you know what, something has been going on. Because
Yeah.
sometimes it
Yeah.
just takes someone outside of you to notice. Because as people, like as the client, as the individual, when you're experiencing that, you are also going through, am I just being lazy? Like, why am I so tired? No one else in the world is tired, only me. And I'm just sucking at life right now. So
Yeah.
if you as a coach can say, "Hey, I'm noticing this. Is
Mm.
something going on?" Right? Like, because sometimes as people we think like we're the only ones having that experience.
Yeah.
But if someone else outside of us can notice, like that's huge. Like that is huge for just validation and for the client, for us to just say, you know what? I think something is going on.
Yeah.
And then when they can get help, the help that they need, then like come back and your training sessions are going to be a lot better because everyone's on the same page.
Mhm. So
Gosh, that's just
really quick
that's so good.
before, 'cause I'm on the edge of my seat right now. I got like 1,000 questions.
Go
I'll
off.
try to
Go off.
I'll
Bring
try
them.
to limit it, but you mentioned being tired, being lazy or saying lazy, performance dropping. Any other patterns that you kind of see in the autoimmune space that are like almost exclusive to that instead of like, hey, this person is not having good sleep, or like what are other things that are like almost a pattern that you see that would almost for sure say like, okay, this person probably falls under that bucket, or is that not even understood?
Yeah, that's difficult to say just because with autoimmune disease, like it is each individual's immune system responding to an overload of both internal, external inputs, right? So
I
it's
Hmm.
just
see.
like with autoimmune disease, like you really have no idea how autoimmunity is going to show up for each person. But in
Mm,
Yeah.
general, you can usually count on extreme fatigue, um, disrupted sleep, brain fog is a huge thing. Like people just
yeah.
kind of
Okay.
like being out of it a lot. And then usually like gut issues, gut inflammation is very tied to
Mm,
autoimmune disease. So if someone who is like making a lot of progress suddenly starts like gaining a lot of weight, and or decreasing strength, right? So
Mm.
you have those signs, just like
interesting.
things that are sort of like in reverse of increasing like
Yeah. Yeah.
humanness, if that makes
Got
sense.
it.
Like earlier we talked about like increasing human performance,
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
that are just like in reverse of that. um I
Got
think
it.
are the red flags, so to speak,
Okay.
to your clients. Yeah.
Yeah. That's helpful. That's helpful.
Yeah. So with that kind of same lens in mind, is there, throughout this journey yourself and experiencing, what healing feels like for you, and then now taking that and, you know, bringing strength training and bringing all these, I guess holistics probably now hopefully becoming more of just like how people write programs and
Yeah.
taking into account sleep and nutrition and bringing in things that impact someone's mind like journaling and fueling and all of that. But there's journaling and meditation, but is there anything or things that you think now just apply to everybody? Like, if you're working with someone who doesn't have any autoimmune symptoms, no diagnosis, like no matter who you are, I would do X, Y, and Z with them. Is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think it's really important for anyone to increase their interoception, just being
Mm.
able to feel the inside of your body.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier that early
I
on
hear
in
that.
my exercise journey, I used exercise as a way to dissociate, right? I
Hmm.
was trying to, disconnect and like hate my way out of a body that I didn't like, right? Because I was told
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
like, oh, your body's attacking you, it's confused. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna have some sense of control, right? And so
Mm.
I think it's important as coaches that we help our clients learn to be in their body. And that
Mm.
sounds kind of counterintuitive to say because it's like, as movement coaches, as movement professionals, like, yeah, of course, Danny, like, that's our job. That's what we do. We help people be in their body. But what I'm talking about is like really feel into their body, like really connect. Like when you are
Yeah.
squatting, are you aware of what your little toe is doing, right? Like really connecting the entirety of your body into each movement,
Mm.
connecting and feeling as you move. That is a learned and practiced skill, because like anyone, and we've all had the clients, right, that you're like providing corrections and they're like, yeah, I'm doing it, and they're like absolutely not doing it, right? We've had those clients, and so helping our clients to slow down and really feel is going to create a better movement experience and a better body experience for the
Mm.
client, right? Any client, general population, autoimmune disease, whatever, right? Because what happens as a result of people learning to feel inside of their body is that they start becoming not only more aware of their physical body, but they start becoming aware of their lifestyle choices, their behaviors, the way they interact with other people, their relationships, their reactions, they're
Mm.
just their mindset. When you
Yeah.
increase awareness from the inside, that starts to expand outside. And then clients kind of just start to like fix all those things themselves. And it makes our job as coaches a lot easier if we can um, you know, learn to ask better questions around like, what are you feeling when you're doing this movement? What is your experience in that? Can you feel your core connected into the ground?
Mm.
Can you feel the top of your head as you move, right? Like,
Yeah.
are you really aware of your body? So I think helping our clients increase their interoception is going to have a ripple effect into every other area of their life.
That's I'm
Yeah.
unprepared for that. That's very good.
Clipping
Fun
that.
fact:
We're clipping that.
interoceptive and interoceptive. It's a hard word for me to say. Like JT can't say strategy. I can't
Interoception.
say
So think like
interoception.
perception. Our perception is like what we
Yeah.
perceive in the world around us,
Hmm.
but can
And then this
we
internally.
perception in on the inside?
I always say introspection. I don't know why that word just comes
Introspection is
out.
like very similar. I think introspection is
Similar
more of like in the mind.
thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, more like thoughts, reflecting on things you've thought or things you've done. But I don't know why that word comes out when I try to say interoceptive. But that's like,
Yeah.
it's wild how unaware we are of how
Mhm.
things make us feel. Like you just like you show up at work and you're like, ah, man, I'm anxious as hell. All right, well, I'm just gonna drink more coffee. Like you don't, like, you're just like going through life, like not. It's a crazy. I think about it from like an emotional perspective, and
Mhm.
I was playing around with this one app called How We Feel, and it basically has like 50 or so different emotions in there. One, I was like, I didn't realize there were that many emotions. It was like happy, sad, mad. But like two, it's like, oh, when I'm aware, I could do something.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, that feels good. I'm gonna keep doing that.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, I feel better. Like, wow, who would have thought? So you mentioned like clients basically being able to now help themselves. Is that essentially like what you found with your clients' journeys now as they become more aware of themselves?
Oh yeah, I absolutely love when my clients don't need me. You
Yeah.
know, autonomy is sexy. I will always say that. If I can help my clients, yeah, be more aware of their internal environment and how that impacts their external environment. Like we go back to that conversation around responsibility. And like Phil, you just said that. Like when you are aware of how anxious you feel, or if you feel angry, you're like, oh, I do feel this. Actually, I can shift this. And
Mhm.
that is taking responsibility for your well being, right?
Mhm.
And even if it is something as small as, like, okay, I feel anxious, I'm going to just take a long exhale,
Yeah.
right? Something so simple that can have a huge impact. Like, you then start to practice that in other areas of your life. And
Mm.
Yeah.
that's why I love when I get messages from my clients that are like, hey, I was feeling anxious today and I just refocus with like a round of box breathing, or
Hell yeah.
hey, I was having a morning, right, and I checked in with myself, and it
Mm.
shifted the energy of my entire day. It's just teaching people to just feel comfortable being with themselves, I think is really huge. And that for me is like what really started this like next level of healing, of
Yeah.
because for me, for a long time the journey was kind of like these external factors, right? Like, oh, it's just
Mm.
better exercise, a better approach to exercise, I should say, a change in my nutrition, better hydration practices, meditation. But when I started to, one, accept that like I don't really like being with myself. Like, I'm very judgmental of myself and I don't like
Mm.
being with that. Like, that's why as a high achieving, high performer individual, I busy myself with a lot of things. And that can also
Mm.
go back to that like conversation around like complicated solutions. Like, do we make things complicated so that we don't have to sit with ourselves? We distract ourselves with things to do. Like, let me tell you about like my morning routine, right? Like, you'll brush my teeth, drink my like morning water. I gotta stretch. I gotta work out. I gotta walk the dog. I gotta make breakfast. I gotta get things ready, like all before 8 a.m. Like, no one can do that. But like,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like adding all of these things, all of these solutions for like a high performance morning, and I was just miserable, right? But when I started getting comfortable being with the uncomfortableness of being with myself, like my relationship to myself started changing. And that is when I started realizing there's a lot of like unaddressed emotions that are like
Yeah.
fueling my behaviors. Can I sit with those emotions, right? Can
Mm.
I confront them? Can I have a conversation with angry Daniela? Can I have a conversation with like sad Daniela without like judging myself about it, right? And once I started to be comfortable being with myself, like my energy just as a person started changing.
Mm.
And it's no coincidence that the results in like my labs, my blood work started changing.
Yeah.
And when I started
Yeah.
doing the the practice of being with myself, of like being like interoceptively intelligent, I think I just made up
Mm.
that phrase, so we'll
That's good.
trademark that.
Trademark that. Yes.
And when I started just having more awareness of myself, like things started changing medically as well. And
Yeah.
Mm.
then the conversation came up with my doctor about being able to get off medication. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think like helping your clients like take responsibility for themselves so that they don't always need you, because like dependency on you is that's a whole different conversation, right? Like, that's a
Yeah.
whole other thing.
Yeah.
But when clients can begin to take responsibility for themselves, their health, their progress, it makes your job easier. It makes your relationship together a lot better. But two, like your client becomes unstoppable. Not
Mm.
saying that they'll never have trials in life. Like, we're human, we will, but they're going to be a lot more confident knowing that they can handle things without running to you for every
Mm.
single thing, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because when people are like, Phil, JT, like, what should I do? What should I eat? How much water should I drink? Like, they're outsourcing their health to their coaches.
Yeah.
And as long
Mm.
as their health is in the hands of somebody else, they will never truly have it.
Sure.
Mm.
Sure. And man, there's so much
That's
wisdom
a
with
lot.
what you
So
just
good.
said. And then before Bill kind of lands this plane, like with trying to make this concise, because I'm like, man, that was so good. I can't rewind this live. But it almost like what you said in terms of like sitting with yourself being
Mhm.
uncomfortable. There's a lot of people who just don't do that, like you mentioned, and because it's uncomfortable. But from what I heard that you do, what you did was you started to put words into those emotions that you felt to actually provide
Hmm.
solutions for those feelings, which I
Yeah.
think is like what the actual process is. For me, I've been thinking like an engineer almost, like how do I operationalize something to actually create a solution for the problem. But I think for that's kind of like what I heard you say. Like when I'm sad, that means like I don't know what to do. When I'm anxious, that means there's too many things to do. So I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm sad. Let me just learn the skill to get me out of sadness. If I'm anxious, then let me just reduce everything and focus on
Yeah.
one thing. So I think there's a lot of value to what you said in terms of like being uncomfortable, understanding why you're uncomfortable, and putting words into those things that you feel in order to make sure you're not just throwing your high performance solutions in that morning, but there's actually solutions in that morning for you to make it high performing based off of what you feel. Right. So I
Yeah.
think just like mind blown, to say the least on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me make it easy for you. This is how I did it, and I don't know if like this really helps anyone else, but I think it might. Like for me, I I gave them names, right? Because I think when we can like name something, we can tame it in a sense,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
for sure.
And then that's kind of like when working with people with chronic pain, people are just in a hurry to get rid of the pain, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But can you like personify it in a way? And for me, um, my pain was more rooted in like emotional things.
Mm.
And so I started naming them, and I yeah, in my mind it kind of created like angry Daniela and sad Daniela and sick Daniela,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And like um angry Daniela is just like me, like in flames, right? And it's just like you start talking to that
Yeah.
anger, and you're like, what do you need?
Yeah.
Right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when you talk to your anger, and it's like, what do you need? When if I'm like talking to myself but in flames, and I say, what do you need? Angry Danielle is just looking for someone to say, hey, I see you, like I validate you,
Mm.
Yeah.
like that's
Yeah.
all that, right?
You should make a picture book for like for adults.
Yeah.
You
I would
know, like
say it's not this is for adults need this shit so badly.
yeah.
So badly.
I did
Yeah.
find a filter on Instagram where you're like in flames, and I thought
Fine.
about like
Yeah.
making some videos of like, hey, what's
It
up,
makes
Angry
sense.
Daniela here.
It makes sense. It paints the picture
Yeah.
to,
It
no pun
does.
intended, but no, I love
Yeah,
that.
or
I love
like
that.
sad Daniela, sad Daniela kind of holds this little umbrella over her rain cloud, or like anxious
Yeah.
Daniela is like, JT, you mentioned like sometimes you feel anxious, and like how do you check in with that? Like if you can be aware of, anxiety is really just fear of the unknown. And you can ask yourself
Mm.
like, what am I scared of? What am I afraid of? And like usually like I'm the same
Yeah.
way when I have like too many things on my to-do list, like I don't want to do any of them. I get so anxious that I just don't do anything.
Yeah.
And
It's
Yeah.
like where do I
when I
start?
yeah, when I take a step back and say like, what am I afraid of?
Sure.
The answer is
Mm.
usually like, what if I don't
Yeah.
finish this? Or what if I don't do a good job?
Yeah.
What if
Yeah.
other people judge me? What if I'm
Hmm.
judging me? Maybe I am.
Yeah. That makes me all this like is so good. If we're gonna have hopefully a bunch of people reflecting and a bunch of coaches now going to therapy, which is great. But I
And
think
increase
like
their interoception.
and increase their interoception. They need that. Interoceptively intelligent. That's
Yeah.
There you
good.
go.
Yeah.
Trademark.
I'll
That's
not even
trademark
try.
for you. You
I'll
trademarked
not
it.
even
That's
try.
good. But like I think about all like a lot of coaches too and our clients and athletes we work with talking about like training is my therapy or like when I go play a sport it's my therapy, and I think there are positive psychological, social benefits to training. But also, I think a lot of it's ducking the problem. Like, no, you're just not thinking about it, right? Like, when I'm working out, I'm not thinking about how anxious I am because I'm
Yeah.
thinking about training. I'm not
Yeah.
thinking about how sad I am. I'm not thinking about that I'm angry because I'm distracting myself from the actual problem. I'm distracting
100%.
myself from the actual emotions. And again, not to discredit any social, emotional benefits from exercise, but like you're still ducking the
Hmm.
actual root issue. So we're not getting better we're not getting better in the way that we could be if we were more aware of our actual emotions.
Yeah.
I think on that, sorry to interrupt, but I think just like, my ego is trying to speak up right now, and like I agree, I get it. For me, like when I was like playing 6 hours of basketball, when I had 6 hours of homework to do in college, I was like, yeah, it makes me feel good, right? I think like
Yeah.
I think a lot of people misconstrued the flow state, and then like
Mhm.
using that as an excuse to feel good. Like it does
Yeah.
feel good,
Yeah.
but then like we're kind of ducking at the same time, like you mentioned. So it's interesting that you say that, where it's like we need to just find different ways to get into the flow state. Every
Yeah.
human needs to, and we're not just don't use whatever you just as an
Yeah.
excuse. So talking
Absolutely.
to me,
Yeah, I agree with all of that, with what both of you said, because like I think too, like it's also not healthy to just always be in your emotions, and like
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
a
that's
conversation
where I'm
that
at
like
right now.
I have too. JT's like, yeah, I know,
Uh,
that's what I
okay,
meant.
I'm trying.
fine.
uh, that's a conversation too that I have with my clients, because like with autoimmunity and with individuals that are like quote unquote in their healing journey, right? You have a tendency, because that's another identity you take on. It's like, now I'm in my I'm in my healing era, as the kids say these days, right? Um, and then you take that on as your identity. Well, like then you're just always healing. You're always healing. You're always looking for the next thing to heal. You're always
Mm,
looking for a problem to heal. And you're never actually living in the already healed. And like that is what my podcast, the Remade Life podcast, is about, is like living
yeah.
your life outside of autoimmune disease and outside of like always trying to heal, right? 'Cause you're always looking for that emotion. You're always looking for that wound,
Mm,
that childhood trauma, that, excuse that you gotta solve. Like, if I can just get here, then things will be good, right?
right.
And we see that in the general population too. So like, yeah, I think that there is validation in like saying, in a sense, like exercise is therapy, but like also therapy is therapy.
Yes,
But
therapy.
exercise provides that the mental benefit,
Yeah.
social
Mhm.
aspect of it. It's important to be in community. It's important to like get your mind off of the chronic
Yeah.
pain, off of
Yeah.
the autoimmune disease, off of like start living your life,
Mhm.
live, right? And there is a benefit to like, yeah, to kind of stepping outside of the like mental piece sometimes, but also recognizing that like, yeah, I'm playing 6 hours of basketball to avoid doing my homework. Like that's probably a problem. like, like, am I in flow state when I have this like heavy baggage right behind me? Like, just like I'm carrying these things.
I
Like,
was, I
yeah,
was
you know what I
Daniela.
mean? So,
That's why it took me long, but no,
yeah.
that I love how you frame that. I think there's a lot of value in
Yeah.
that, and just understanding that there are uh, ways to frame it in a healthy manner, and you just have to live. Just don't, it's not, we're not ducking it, but it's a way to step out and to allow you to step in with a fresh mind, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think like how often, maybe you have or haven't experienced any clients coming to you when they say, just fix me, right?
I
Like,
wish.
Yeah.
can we just for a second like remember that like we are all humans having a human experience, and
Right.
you don't need fixing. Like this idea
That's
that
fair.
you need fixing is going to keep you in that cycle of always chasing these like, I
Sure.
need a solution to this problem. And that
Yeah.
is again, going back to the conversation of like complicating our solutions because we think we need fixing, but like you don't. Like there's nothing wrong with having a human experience.
Mm.
Like the things that got you to where you are now to for you to say I need the help of a trainer, like that's life. Like everyone experiences life in a different way. And you know
Yeah.
what? Good for you for recognizing that you could use the support of a trainer. And
Yeah.
there's no you don't need fixing. And I think that is also a very important like skill to give our clients
Sure.
is like
Mm.
you are not a problem. Like
Yeah.
you are the solution to you, right?
Mm. Gosh, I'm like trying to. I can't think of anything. I'm just reflecting on my own like life right now. There's a lot going on in my brain, Daniela. You got a lot of things going on up here. I'm like over analyzing everything I'm doing in my life and like thinking about a lot. This is Where to land this plane,
Yeah,
JT?
I have that. I tend
Me
to
too,
have that
man.
effect
Trying to
on
keep it
people.
up
I
there.
make people turn inwardly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I mean,
Love
you're
that.
damn good at it. This is great. I hope coaches are getting the same thing listening to this, and then now like thinking about how can I get my clients to reflect? How can I get my clients to think inward? Because that's something that JT and I talk about all the time. Is that's when we understand our values, when we understand who we are as a coach, what our philosophy is, what we really believe in, like that's when the good stuff happens, right?
Yeah,
Like that's when we can really make change and make real impact. So hopefully coaches listening are feeling that right now.
absolutely.
All right. Real quick. Let's land this plane with just three. We'll just go quick three rapid fire
Oh gosh.
questions. Are you
Okay.
ready?
I think so.
They're not that intense. People clam up on this first one though, JT. Some people get a little squirrely on this one. Your top three music artists right now that you're listening to.
Oh gosh. Okay. I'll be honest. I don't listen to a lot of music. I'm one of
That's okay.
the few people in the world that I drive in silence. So that's where I do a lot of my
Oh
thinking, right?
wow.
Um,
Okay. Okay.
but really always a J-Lo fan. Always the J-Lo fan.
Yeah.
And who else? I mean, it's hard to not pay attention to Taylor Swift right now.
It's
She's
hard.
a
It's everywhere.
fantastic artist. And oh my gosh. I'm trying to
We
think
could do just
through.
two.
I
We
mean,
could just
okay, like Pitbull always has a special place in my
there
heart.
we go. Okay.
There we go.
Dale.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel
I
that.
love it.
Pitbull
I
has
That's
a
a
love it.
special
solid.
place in my heart.
Those are three artists you can't go wrong with.
No.
I feel like anywhere you are, you throw on some of that stuff,
Yeah.
and you can't go wrong.
Don't
That's a good.
worry.
That's a
No.
good healthy mix.
When we're done with this, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, I also listen to.
go
It's fine.
through
Yeah.
Spotify quick and see. All right. We've heard through the grapevine that you like to cook. What is your favorite thing to cook?
What is my favorite thing to cook? Well, right now I'm really experimenting with sourdough bread. Yeah.
Oh,
If you listen to my podcast I did with Emma, I gave a really great analogy about
it was good.
sourdough bread. Yeah, sourdough bread is a life lesson.
Cool.
What else do I like to cook? I like to keep my meals like pretty simple, but I really enjoy making Friday night pizza. My husband and I do Friday night pizza just about every week. We make the crust ourselves. We do like a sweet potato crust, and then we just throw all of our like week's leftovers, like meats and veggies, like whatever's left in the fridge. We throw it on a pizza and grab a little
Hell yeah.
wine, movie. That's it.
Love it.
All right, that's a good item. I'm just gonna jot that down. That's a good
I
idea.
know.
I like that a lot.
We went to Italy last summer and we did
Mm.
a cooking class, and we were like
Okay.
talking to the guy about pizza, and he was like, because we were telling him, we were like, yeah, we do our Friday night pizza, we just throw all our like leftover veggies, and he was like, that's actually why pizza was invented. like that's kind of the origin of pizzas. People just took their leftovers and threw it on some dough and called it pizza.
Oh,
Well, shit.
Fun
There you go. Heard it here maybe first.
fact.
I did.
Maybe not. That's first from JT and I. All right, last one is a big one. In recent years, recent months, recently, what is one thing that you've changed your mind about? Or if there's nothing you changed your mind on, something you've doubled down on?
That the body is made to heal. The body is capable of healing. I mentioned earlier that like for a long time, like I would question my own experience because like no one else was having it. I didn't have that like external
Hmm.
validation. But the more that I have kind of um, the more that I like dive into this work of strength training for autoimmunity, restorative work for autoimmunity, breath work, nervous system regulation, the more that I see that the body is capable of healing when given the right environment.
Hmm.
Yeah, the body only knows how to heal. And I think that that is very backwards for people, especially people that have been told that their body's confused, their body's attacking them. Like, yeah, why would you trust a body that is attacking you? But when you shift that perspective and realize that all the symptoms you experience are out of protection, like your body is
Right.
always aiming to protect you, always aiming to heal you, you begin to have compassion for your body and your relationship to your body changes. And the more that I see that, and the more that I dive into this work, the more that I know with confidence and being able to when my doctor told me I could get off medication, I was like, absolutely nobody's changing my mind about this. Like, I was like, no one can tell me anything. I was like, you can
Yeah.
heal from autoimmune disease, absolutely, 100%, and no one can tell me otherwise.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, Daniela, again, thank you. This has been incredible. I'm stoked to just like immediately listen to this back. A
Yeah.
lot of good nuggets in here. But where can people find you? Where can people learn more of what you got going on?
Yeah, so I have a couple of places where people can learn with me on Instagram at Daniela.Spear. I also have a YouTube channel, Daniela Spear on YouTube as well. And you can also take a look at my website, remadewellness.com. My favorite way to connect with my audience, and I hope that your audience will also join, is my weekly newsletter, the Remade Journal. It's a weekly email of me just kind of unpacking my journey through healing and sharing resources that have been really helpful for me. So I'd love for anyone that is just interested in, coming along for that journey to join the Remade Journal. And then also my podcast, the Remade Life podcast, is on a little bit of a hiatus right now because I'm finishing up school, getting licensed for massage therapy. But in a few weeks, the show will go on. So I'll be back on the air in a couple of weeks, more episodes. And one last thing, one very important resource. If you go to my website, there is a free download. It's an ebook called Unlocking Your Body's Secrets, a guide to understanding your emotions and healing chronic symptoms. And basically, it is a starting point, kind of like a starting stepping stone to healing autoimmune disease, to connecting with your body and having or developing a better relationship with your body in order to heal autoimmune and chronic symptoms. So lots of
Sweet.
resources for you all. So I hope that your audience will find at least one thing that resonates with them.
Yeah, hell yeah. Well, we will definitely link all that good stuff in the show notes so people can easily get to it. But definitely recommend the pod. That's something we've been diving into. So excited for it to come back
Yeah,
online soon here.
thank you.
JT, where can people find you?
Yeah. CoachJT.mp3 on IG and Threads. Danielle, thanks for the time. Learned so much here. One thing that did stick out just when you were saying all that. Something you said in an episode was when you have like an autoimmune disease, a lot of people think something's wrong with me, where in actuality your body's telling you like something's right with you because it's trying to heal itself. So
Yeah.
that was something that stuck out a lot. So a lot of good nuggets in this chat. Selfishly, I always ask like all my questions that I'm like, I should be paying you for this, but hopefully, your audience can get a
Life
lot
of
of that from that too.
podcasting, just free
Yeah,
information.
It's free.
we appreciate
Just
it.
free.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Oh
you.
my goodness.
Thank you to you, JT, and you, Phil, for inviting me on your podcast. This is just an honor to be able to connect with your audience and that you would share your platform for me to share about my experience and my journey with autoimmune disease. So I really appreciate it.
Cool.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right.
Rock with my fist, burning in the heat, bro. Get a lock with my